Hey guys, welcome back. And I first of all want to say thank you, of course, to all you new subscribers out there who have subscribed recently to the channel. I appreciate it very much. And I want to say that I encourage you to click on the bell icon in my channel, basically so you can be notified when a new video is dropped. Because I've been seeing a lot in the comment section that people have said that their subscription feed is not showing when a new video is posted by me on my channel. So if you click on the notification bell on this channel, you will be notified, hopefully a lot easier, by YouTube. But anyway, in today's video, we're going to be talking about, of course, the Nintendo Switch. It's been getting a lot of hype, and people are talking about it all over the place on YouTube and on the internet. And now we have something very interesting that popped up today, of course, from Sony, who have made public this patent that they have been hiding for the last 2 years. Now, I want to make it clear before we get into this that patents do not always come to fruition. They don't always come true as far as when patents are filed and when they come out. A lot of times these devices never actually get made. They have an idea, they patent it just in case something happens and they're able to make that idea come true. So this might be what Sony is doing right here. Since this patent is 2 years old, they now have basically made it public, and it is a brand new portable device from Sony. And it looks a lot like the Vita with detachable controllers. And of course, everyone's going to agree that it looks very similar to the Nintendo Switch. Now, as far as details are concerned from this patent, it was filed in Japan, and I can't actually find any of the actual documentation to go along with this patent besides just the pictures. So as you can see from the pictures, it looks very similar to the Nintendo Switch. As far as whether or not the controllers are detachable, I'm going to assume that they are detachable, even though we can't really tell because they're not showing anything being detached in the pictures themselves. And if they are, of course, that makes sense for a device like that if it's portable. What's really interesting about this, though, is that Sony is making this patent public 2 weeks before the Nintendo Switch launches. Now, why would they be doing that, right? So it seems like they may be doing some kind of response type of portable to the Nintendo Switch, just in case the Switch does take off and becomes a huge hit. Now, if you're not familiar with Sony's track record with portables, they got up actually to a pretty good start with the PSP in 2004-2005 timeframe. The PSP sold over 80 million consoles worldwide. It was very successful actually, and some people may not realize that, but of course it sold only half as much as the Nintendo DS, which sold almost 160 million consoles worldwide. I think it was 155 million, and it was basically the highest selling console of all time, the Nintendo DS. So the DS totally overshadowed the PSP. However, when the DS was first revealed, a lot of the press and of course the fanboys said that the PSP would absolutely crush the DS because the PSP at the time was the most advanced portable device that there was for gaming. And it did actually have a lot more graphics processing power than the Nintendo DS did at the time. The DS looked very similar to a Nintendo 64 as a portable, but it didn't have any mip-mapping or texture filtering, so it had pixelated graphics on a portable screen, which weren't very noticeable because it was such a small screen size. The PSP had a much more higher definition display. I don't think it was quite HD at the time, but it was a lot higher DPI than the DS was, and of course it had more detailed graphics and texture filtering and all those things, so it definitely looked a lot better graphically than the DS, but it did not equal into having better sales than the DS at all. The DS absolutely crushed it in sales. Then you fast forward to 2011, and the Vita was showed compared to the 3DS at the time, and of course the same thing happened. People were expecting the Vita to crush and destroy the 3DS because of its graphics. Again, because of the graphics. It was very interesting. But the Vita, even though it was a nice piece of hardware and it did have very advanced technology for its time in 2011, it was basically a flop. To this day, it's only sold 15 million systems approximately worldwide, and it's been on the market since 2011, and here we are in 2017. So the Vita is considered a failure, but a few things to take away from the Vita that were interesting. People expected it to do way better than the 3DS, but Sony made some critical mistakes with the Vita. The first mistake, possibly the biggest one they made since the PlayStation 3 price of $600 at launch, was having those proprietary memory cards that were required to be used on the Vita and were extremely expensive. We're talking like $70, $80 for a memory card. And of course they dropped in price over time, but the damage was done already. You had to buy these memory cards. You couldn't even use standard memory from SD cards. You couldn't use USB hard drives. You couldn't use USB sticks. You had to use Sony's proprietary memory. And it really hurt the sales of the system because people simply were not going to buy all these extra memory cards and buy a very expensive system, which was the other problem of the Vita, which was that it was too expensive. I believe they had a $250 version and a $300 version with a wireless data plan. So it was very expensive upfront cost, and the system did not take off, and it basically was a flop, right? And over time it turned into an indie platform where you could find a ton of interesting Japanese RPGs and things of the like on there. So granted, it was a failure by Sony, and here we are in 2017 and Sony drops this patent and makes it public. Why? Well, quite possibly they see the Switch's idea and they may like the idea and they want to take advantage of it on their own terms. Sony's always had that mindset about Nintendo, is that whatever you can do, we can do better. They tried to do it with the PSP, then they failed. They tried to do it with the Vita and they failed miserably. The 3DS has sold over 60 million to 15 million on the Vita. Sony has historically always been completely dominated by Nintendo in the handheld market. So whether or not that would change with a potential new handheld from Sony, of course, remains to be seen. And we don't even know if Sony is even going to release anything, right, for sure. However, there's some interesting things to consider about Sony, because as we know, Sony is in deep cahoots and in bed basically with AMD. And as we know, Sony was partnering with Nvidia in the PlayStation 3 days, and they cut ties with them and joined forces with AMD with the PlayStation 4. And Mark Cerny, the lead architect of the PlayStation 4, has gone on record in saying that their relationship with AMD has been absolutely amazing with Sony. So theoretically, if Sony did release a Nintendo Switch competitor in the handheld market, you can pretty much guarantee it's going to be something based on AMD. And we know that Sony has historically gone for the highest spec handheld and power that they could possibly have in their system. Even though they've had limited success in doing that, especially with the Vita, that is Sony's track record. So the one thing that's interesting about that is that AMD has been working on some cutting edge technology for 2017 for their Raven Ridge APU. WCCF Tech did an article about this late in 2016 talking about how AMD is planning on bringing APUs with PlayStation 4 gaming grade graphics and high memory bandwidth to the market in 2017. Their low-level Raven Ridge APU runs between 4 watts and 35 watts, and it would be using possibly a quad-core Ryzen or Zen CPU paired with a Vega GPU that is, of course, shrunken down. The article brought out about this Raven Ridge APU. It says, with everything we know about Vega being significantly more power efficient, we can expect Raven Ridge integrated graphics engine to easily surpass the PS4. I know this has been a hot topic of late. We know that Nintendo is not focused on specs, and we have also discussed in various different discussions in the past that, hey, PlayStation 4 graphics just are not possible in a mobile device yet. However, as we see, AMD is really trying hard to produce something that could be possibly visually on par with the PS4 in a mobile type of platform. PS4 is based on a 2012 graphics card, and this would be coming out 5 years later. So theoretically, that is AMD's goal. So if all this comes to fruition and Sony does come out with a new PlayStation Portable, chances are it would be running on a Raven Ridge APU. And of course, it would be expensive, right? And there's no doubt about that. Sony handhelds are always extremely expensive. So is all that going to matter versus a Switch? We have no idea, right? But it is interesting, and I want to talk about it here because the Switch is coming out in 2 weeks, and all of a sudden Sony releases this patent to the public, possibly to get people's attention away from the Switch and away from Nintendo and see that, hey, look at us, we're Sony and we're doing something too with the portable. Even though they didn't actually say anything, there's already an article on IGN covering this. So it could mean something, but again, we don't know for sure. And of course, the Switch is going to be out long before anything from Sony is going to be released. Sony also has a long history of being labeled as copycats of Nintendo, right? With the addition of analog sticks to their controllers, with just the fact that they got into the portable market. And of course, the blatantly obvious addition of motion controllers with the PlayStation 3, with those Move controllers that were definitely inspired by the Nintendo Wii. I mean, that was totally obvious. So for Sony to come out with a device that looks similar to the Nintendo Switch, but in their own way, I don't think anybody should really be surprised by that. Whether or not something like that would be successful, we have no idea, right? So I wouldn't read too much into this until we actually see or hear something from Sony. But I did think that was kind of funny that we see this just 2 weeks before the release of the Switch. Sony's trying to get in on that Nintendo Switch piece of the pie, right? A reminder, tomorrow, Saturday, 7 p.m. Pacific time, I will be on Andrew Eisen's podcast. So stay tuned for that. I'll be tweeting out links to it tomorrow so you guys can check that out. We're going to be talking about Nintendo and the Switch on Andrew Eisen's podcast tomorrow. Alright guys, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and comment. I'll talk to you very soon in the next video. Take care.